It wasn't the static of whining radio waves in the dead of night, nor the roaring engines of B-29 flying fortresses. If you listened closely enough, beneath the submerged compartments of the massive I-400 class super submarines floating silently off the Pacific coast, you would hear a sound more chilling than the most devastating bomb. It was the rustling of hundreds of millions of tiny creatures crawling inside dark metal containers. Millions of fleas carrying the bubonic plague, the nightmare that once wiped out a third of Europe's population during the Middle Ages. On September 22, 1945, under a top-secret plan codenamed Cherry Blossoms at Night, Siren seaplanes carrying this pathogen would launch from submarine decks, heading straight for the skies over San Diego, California, USA. When these biological bombs detonated mid-air, a rain of death would pour down upon the American continent, bringing the Black Death to sow panic, hatred, and uncontrollable pandemics. It was a perfect doomsday scenario orchestrated by the brutal Unit 731. And that scenario almost became a reality, if not for a shocking event that altered the trajectory of all humanity. We are always taught in history textbooks that the US dropping 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was one of the most brutal crimes against humanity, an indelible moral stain of the 20th century. The images of giant mushroom clouds swallowing hundreds of thousands of innocent lives in the blink of an eye have been burned into the subconscious of many generations. But there is a cruel truth, a dark corner that historians often deliberately avoid or inadvertently gloss over. The apocalyptic scenario at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was actually the most humane choice, the knot that saved tens of millions of people, including millions of lives of the Japanese people themselves. Sounds crazy, cruel, and full of paradoxes, right? How could a weapon of mass destruction be considered salvation? Today, we will tear away the veils of time, unlocking the buried top-secret files of the Pentagon and the Imperial Japanese Supreme Command, to step into the darkest alternate reality. Welcome to the parallel timeline where the Manhattan Project failed, the atomic bomb was never dropped, and World War II did not end in the fall of 1945. History this time is written not only in blood, but in the annihilation of an entire civilization. To understand why humanity was pushed to the brink, we must travel back in time to the boiling days of the summer of 1945. Europe had fallen silent, Nazi Germany had collapsed under the boots of the Soviet Red Army and the Allied forces. The eyes of the whole world were now focused on the Pacific, where the Japanese Empire was still fiercely resisting like a cornered beast. The Axis war machine was broken, but the Japanese spirit of fighting to the death was not. The bloody battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa had sounded a terrifying alarm for military leaders in Washington. At Okinawa, just to capture a tiny island at the gateway to Japan, the US military had to pay the price of over 12,000 Marine and Navy lives, while the Japanese side lost over 100,000 soldiers and a massive number of civilian casualties who were forced or voluntarily jumped off cliffs to commit suicide rather than surrender. That was a bloody puzzle that President Harry S. Truman faced every night when looking at the operational map. Deep within the halls of power in Washington, a revisionist historical conspiracy theory had always been smoldering: atomic diplomacy. Many modern historians have raised a highly controversial question: was Truman's decision to drop the atomic bomb truly to crush the Japanese Empire, or was the deeper target of those mushroom clouds aimed at another audience sitting in Moscow, Joseph Stalin? Japan in July 1945 was actually exhausted. Their major industrial cities had been flattened by firebombs, their sea routes completely blockaded. Some figures in the Japanese cabinet, with the tacit approval of Emperor Hirohito, desperately sought to approach the Soviet Union to act as a mediator for a conditional peace treaty. But Truman could not accept a conditional peace. Moreover, he saw the phantom of communism expanding across Eastern Europe and did not want the Soviet Union to have a chance to intervene deeply in the Asian theater. The atomic bomb, from the cold perspective of this conspiracy theory, was not just the finishing blow to World War II, but the brutal opening shot of the Cold War. It was a fiery message sent to the Kremlin: the United States possesses the power of God, and they are not afraid to use it. But whatever the political motives behind it, the reality on the Pacific battlefield at that time was still a quagmire of hatred and extreme racism from both sides. Unlike the European theater, where American and German soldiers sometimes still viewed each other as human beings, in the Pacific, the war took on a ruthlessly dehumanizing tone. The American propaganda machine depicted the Japanese as rodents, ruthless vermin that needed to be eradicated at the roots. Conversely, Tokyo's propaganda machine brainwashed its people that American soldiers were white demons, savage enemies who would slaughter, rape, and eat Japanese women and children if they set foot on the sacred shores. This dehumanization erased every last moral boundary. It explains why American pilots could drop tens of thousands of tons of napalm, burning Tokyo to the ground and incinerating over 100,000 people in a single night without a shred of hesitation, and it also explains why tens of thousands of young Japanese men were ready to turn their bodies into living bombs, crashing their planes straight into enemy aircraft carriers with an arrogant smile. Hatred stripped both sides of their humanity, turning this conflict into a literal war of racial extermination. When the phantom of atomic weapons is crossed out of our hypothetical historical blueprint, America is left with only one path to subjugate Tokyo, the bloodiest amphibious invasion ever drafted in human imagination, codenamed Operation Downfall. This plan was so colossal that it completely overshadowed the scale of D-Day at Normandy. It was divided into two horrifying phases. First was Operation Olympic, scheduled to launch on November 1, 1945, aiming to capture the southern third of Kyushu Island to turn it into a massive logistical springboard. The sky would be blotted out, the sea surface would be packed with a fleet of 42 aircraft carriers, 24 mighty battleships, and over 400 destroyers. The giant 16-inch guns on the battleships would roar day and night, bombarding up to 18 miles inland, grinding everything to dust. And then, on March 1, 1946, a fatal, knockout, blow named Operation Coronet would be struck right at the Kanto Plain, the heart of Japan, at the very gates of Tokyo. Over 1 million Allied soldiers would swarm the beaches, an unprecedented number of infantry troops in an amphibious operation. General Douglas MacArthur was entrusted with commanding this entire meat grinder. But the Americans had no idea that they were about to throw themselves into a meat grinder with no way out. The Japanese Supreme Command had partially deciphered the plan and accurately predicted the location and time of Operation Olympic. They had prepared a bloody response named Operation Ketsugo, Operation Decisive. This was not a conventional defense plan, but a commitment to collective suicide by an entire nation. The philosophy of Ketsugo was extremely simple yet chilling: the glorious death of 100 million subjects. The Japanese Empire enacted the National Volunteer Combat Act, completely erasing the concept of civilians from the dictionary. Men from 15 to 60 and women from 17 to 40 were forcibly conscripted into the volunteer fighting corps. When a war economy had collapsed to the point of being unable to produce enough guns and ammunition, the Japanese military command equipped their people with the most primitive and desperate weapons: sharpened bamboo spears, grass sickles, daggers, and even crude grenades wrapped around their waists to dive under American Sherman tanks. Millions were trained with a single motto repeated over and over: if each person kills just one American soldier, Japan will be saved. Thrust straight into their bellies. It didn't stop there. The sky over Kyushu would become an apocalyptic nightmare for Allied sailors. Japan had secretly and desperately stockpiled over 10,000 aircraft in the south. Most of these were not the legendary Zero fighters, but obsolete wooden and canvas biplane trainers, which American radar could barely detect until it was too late. They were modified for a one-way trip, carrying bombs, fuel, and a generation of 17 and 18-year-old pilots wearing the Rising Sun headband. These 10,000 kamikazes would pour down like a meteor shower, tearing the Allied fleet apart before they could even land on the shore. Japanese engineers also built thousands of Shinyo suicide motorboats hidden in coastal caves, and Kaiten-manned torpedoes darting through the depths of the ocean. The entire island of Kyushu had been turned into a giant underground anthill with an intricate tunnel system, rendering American naval gunfire useless. The most ruthless intelligence analyses from the Pentagon at the time produced casualty estimates that would terrify any politician. America could lose between 400,000 and 1 million soldiers just to subjugate this empire. The blood of American youth would dye the black sand beaches of Japan red, and American public opinion back home, already exhausted by the long casualty lists from the European theater, would revolt and collapse. But history always knows how to create the craziest scenarios, beyond all human calculation. If the Americans actually ordered the landing in early November 1945, they would face a third enemy more brutal than any gun barrel or suicide squad, Mother Nature. In actual history, in October 1945, a devastating super typhoon named Typhoon Louise swept through the waters of Okinawa, the staging and logistical hub for the American fleet preparing for Operation Downfall. The storm sank, destroyed, and severely damaged hundreds of warships, logistical bases were blown away, and grounded aircraft were crumpled like scrap paper. In our alternate timeline, as the massive American fleets were setting sail for Kyushu right when this storm hit, the disaster would be immeasurable. Tens of thousands of American soldiers would be swallowed by the sea before even catching sight of the Japanese coast. For the Japanese, this natural event would be leveraged by military leaders as an absolute miracle. They would call it the third kamikaze, divine wind, the divine wind that had twice sunk the invading fleet of the Mongol Empire centuries ago, manifesting once again to protect the sacred island nation. This psychological shock would fan the flames of fanaticism among millions of Japanese to an irreversible level, extinguishing any faint remaining voices desiring peace within the cabinet. At that point, no compromise could be offered. The war would be decided by the total annihilation of one of the two civilizations. But the deaths on the fiery beaches of Kyushu were only the tip of a giant iceberg, a bloody prelude to a tragedy tens of thousands of times more brutal, quietly engulfing the entire island. As direct engagement stalemated, the U.S. Air Force Command decided to tighten an invisible noose named Operation Starvation. Even before the first atomic bomb was dropped, hundreds of B-29 flying fortresses continuously laid over 12,000 magnetic and acoustic naval mines into every seaport and vital inland waterway of the Japanese Empire. The results of this campaign were so devastating that no Japanese general dared report the truth to the emperor. 35 of 47 essential shipping routes were completely severed. An island nation entirely dependent on imported food and raw materials was now completely isolated from the rest of the world. Thousands of Japanese merchant ships were sunk, taking millions of tons of rice and wheat to the bottom of the ocean. By the winter of 1945, Japan's food supply system had completely collapsed, giving way to a phantom more terrifying than any weapon of mass destruction. Step into the streets of Tokyo, Osaka, or Kyoto in the bone-chilling cold of the winter of 1945 to 1946 in this hypothetical timeline. The average food ration of a Japanese citizen had plummeted to under 800 calories a day, less than half the bare minimum to sustain basic life. Intelligence photos and surviving historical documents depicted a scene akin to hell on Earth. Millions of people left homeless after the firebombings now had to live a vagabond existence in makeshift shacks made of scrap metal, with no heating, no clean water, and absolutely no food. Trees in the cities were stripped of bark to be boiled and eaten. All wildlife, dogs, cats, and rodents were hunted to extinction. Most heartbreaking was the image of tens of thousands of orphan children wandering amidst the rubble. Medical records of the time predicted a horrific phenomenon. To soothe their agonizing stomach cramps, these children stuffed clay and gravel into their mouths before dropping dead from exhaustion and freezing temperatures. If the war dragged on through 1946, demographers estimated that between 7 and 10 million Japanese would die from starvation and related diseases. That is a death toll dozens of times higher than the destructive power of both bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. And as desperation peaked, the moral boundaries of the Allied forces completely collapsed. Faced with Ketsugo's impregnable defensive cave systems that conventional bombs couldn't penetrate, the Pentagon opened the darkest chapter in the Manual of War: chemical weapons. Declassified documents reveal that the U.S. had stockpiled massive amounts of phosgene and mustard gas at bases in the Pacific. The plan was to use aircraft and artillery to fire these toxic gas shells directly into the ventilation shafts of the Japanese tunnel system. The gas, heavier than air, would seep into the deepest basements, corroding lungs and suffocating hundreds of thousands of people, including soldiers and droves of civilians taking shelter below. Not stopping there, the U.S. also planned to use powerful chemical herbicides, early prototypes of what would later become Agent Orange, to spray over the few remaining cultivated areas of Japan, aiming to completely destroy their last source of life. Here, we are forced to confront an agonizing moral question that leaves historical revisionists speechless. Is a flash death under the million-degree heat of an atomic bomb more cruel, or is suffocating in a dark cave and slowly dying of gnawing hunger for months on end the true zenith of inhumanity? But the Japanese would not sit idly by waiting for death, and their final counterattack would plunge humanity into a dark era with no way out. As we mentioned at the beginning, Unit 731 of the Imperial Japanese Army, an organization notorious for its inhumane medical experiments on living human bodies, was fully prepared for a doomsday event. Under the command of the Angel of Death, Dr. Shiro Ishii, they had successfully bred strains of bubonic plague, anthrax, and cholera with virulence many times higher than in nature. When the American landing at Kyushu turned into a bloody quagmire, and when Japan realized they had nothing left to lose, the cherry blossoms at night plan would be immediately activated. The giant I-400 class submarines carrying seaplanes loaded with flea bombs would not only target San Diego. If successful, they could evade radar and expand their targets to other bustling coastlines like Los Angeles or San Francisco. Hundreds of millions of fleas carrying the bubonic plague would spread across American cities. The U.S. healthcare system in 1945, no matter how advanced, was unprepared for continental-scale biological warfare. The disease would spread at a dizzying pace, causing sheer panic. Food and medicine riots would erupt across the U.S. This biological retaliation would outrage the American public to the point of blindness. They would demand the government carry out a total genocide, permanently wiping the existence of the Japanese archipelago off the world map at any cost. While the US and Japan were locked in a spiral of blood, toxic gas, and disease on the eastern and southern fronts, in the north, a giant red phantom was reaching its cold tentacles down onto the island. It was the storm from the north, the Soviet Red Army. History records that on August 8, 1945, adhering strictly to the commitment at the Yalta Conference, leader Joseph Stalin tore up the neutrality pact with Japan and declared war. Nearly 1.5 million battle-hardened Soviet soldiers, the same ones who had just crushed the Nazi war machine in Europe, poured across the Manchurian border, sweeping away Japan's proud Guangdong army in a mere few weeks. The lightning speed and ruthlessness of the Red Army dealt a fatal blow to the will of Tokyo's military elite. But Stalin's ambitions didn't stop at the Asian mainland. Taking advantage of the US being bogged down in the bloody landing in Kyushu and unable to intervene deeply, Stalin ordered the Soviet Pacific Fleet to prepare for an unprecedented amphibious operation aimed straight at Japan's northernmost island, Hokkaido. By late August 1945, in this alternate timeline, when Japan's defense forces had been drained to reinforce the south to protect Kyushu and Tokyo, their northern gateway was left wide open. The Soviet Union began launching brutal amphibious assaults on the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin. The next plan was detailed out. Red Army rifle divisions would cross the sea and land at the port of Rumoi on the western coast of Hokkaido. The bitter irony of history is that to execute this landing, the Soviet Union used the very landing craft and minesweepers secretly supplied by the US through Project Hula earlier. The civil defense force in Hokkaido, mostly elderly people and women armed with primitive weapons, would be immediately crushed under the artillery fire and legendary T-34 tanks of the Soviet Union. The occupation of the Red Army did not bring liberation but a new nightmare. Hundreds of thousands of Japanese youths and soldiers taken as prisoners of war were herded onto dark freight trains, exiled to freezing gulag concentration camps in harsh Siberia. Most of them were worked to death in mines and dense forests, dying from -40-degree temperatures and a lack of food, never to have the chance to see their homeland of the rising sun again. The Soviet presence on Japanese territory completely shattered all American plans. General MacArthur and President Truman watched in horror, realizing that if they didn't quickly capture Tokyo, all of Japan would fall into the communist sphere of influence. Stalin, with the acumen and ruthlessness of a seasoned dictator, saw the occupation of Japan not just as a military action, but as a once-in-a-millennium opportunity to wash away the historical humiliation of the disastrous defeat in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, while simultaneously establishing a solid outpost for the Soviet Union right in the Pacific. When the US and British Allied forces finally pushed into the Kanto region after flattening the last remnants of the die-hard defenders, they found themselves staring down the gun barrels of the Soviet Red Army, who had swept down from northern Honshu. At this point, Japan was no longer a unified entity. It had become a bloody piece of pie carved up on the geopolitical chessboard of the two world superpowers. A temporary armistice line was hastily drawn, slicing the Japanese archipelago in two. In the north, the People's Republic of Japan was established under Moscow's patronage. In the south, a government backed by the US and Allied forces governed the remaining territory. In that chaotic and brutal picture, what would be the fate of the Japanese imperial family? If the atomic bomb had not forced Hirohito to break all precedents to record his surrender broadcast in August 1945, he would have been trapped in a desperate Game of Thrones. When Tokyo collapsed under the destructive power of Operation Coronet, the imperial family and the Supreme Command would have to evacuate to the massive Matsushiro underground bunker complex in Nagano Prefecture, which was secretly built deep inside the Rocky Mountains to withstand the most powerful bombs. Here, in dark, damp tunnels, completely cut off from the outside world, a bloody mutiny would unfold. The fanatical pro-war faction in the military, those who refused to accept the reality that the war was lost, would not hesitate to seize power, even placing the emperor under house arrest to use his name to continue ordering a fight to the death. If the Soviet Union reached them first, the Japanese royal family might face a tragic end exactly like the family of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia in 1918, a secret execution to completely eradicate the nation's spiritual symbol. Or if the US captured Hirohito, the pressure from public opinion demanding he be brought before an international war crimes tribunal and sentenced to death by hanging would be unstoppable. Under either scenario, the emperor system, the only spiritual pillar keeping Japanese society from disintegrating, would be completely wiped out, plunging the nation into an endless, bloody ideological civil war. Imagine a parallel world entering the 1950s, where the dawn of the atomic age never broke, but the shadow of the Cold War enveloped a devastated, blood-soaked archipelago. The great Japan we know today, with its dazzling neon-lit megacities, high-speed Shinkansen bullet trains, giant tech corporations, and a globally conquering pop culture, would be permanently erased from the timeline. Instead, the world map would record the existence of two completely alien nations, separated by a ruthless geopolitical cut running across central Honshu. To the north is the People's Republic of Japan, a satellite state manipulated by Moscow, ruled with an iron fist and a secret police state system. Beneath the ashes of the ancient capital Kyoto and southern cities is the democratic state of Japan, a massive military outpost for the US and the West, where the economy relies entirely on food aid and permanent marine garrisons. No economic miracle occurs. There is no birth of Sony, Toyota, Honda, or Nintendo. The brilliant minds that could have built these technological empires either fell to an American bullet on the beaches of Kyushu, withered away to bones in cold underground bunkers due to the famine of Operation Starvation, or are exiled in harsh coal mines in distant Siberia. The world loses a massive hub of innovation, and Japan is set back hundreds of years in development, becoming a permanent proxy battlefield between two superpowers. Right in the capital Tokyo, once the symbol of imperial pride, it is now divided in two by a lifeless strip of land filled with barbed wire, minefields, and uncompromising machine gun watchtowers. This Tokyo Wall was erected as an exact replica of the Berlin Wall in Europe, becoming a permanent scar slashing through the hearts of millions of Japanese families. Bloody border crossings happen every night. Thousands of desperate people flee the harsh rule in the north, trying to swim across freezing rivers or sneak through deadly forests to reach the south, where they hope to get a crust of bread or a bowl of relief porridge. This division does not just fracture the territory, it completely tears apart the national identity of the Japanese people. Japan becomes the hottest flashpoint of the Cold War, and the Korean War of 1950 that we know in the real world might never have happened on the Korean peninsula, but would erupt right in the Kanto Valley of Japan. Millions of young American men, instead of bleeding in Busan or Incheon, would have to fight and die in the blighted forests of Honshu Island to stop the red wave from sweeping south. But the nightmare for the American military in the south is no less severe. The U.S. occupation does not bring a tranquil peace but turns into a brutal guerrilla war dragging on for decades. The Ketsugo philosophy, fighting to the bitter end, does not vanish even when the major cities have fallen. Tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers, fanatics refusing surrender orders from any puppet government, retreat deep into the Japanese Alps. Utilizing the treacherous terrain, dense forests, and natural cave systems, they wage a bloody war of attrition, ambushing U.S. supply convoys, assassinating Allied officers, and laying booby traps with poison-tipped bamboo spears scattered across every path. American soldiers patrolling Japanese soil must live in a state of extreme tension, never knowing if the farmer bending over planting rice or the child smiling innocently by the roadside is hiding a primed grenade under their clothes. Long before Americans experienced the psychological trauma syndrome in the jungle battlefields of Vietnam, they would have suffered it in the misty, snow-white forests of Japan. Search and destroy missions, dropping napalm to burn villages suspected of harboring rebels, would occur daily, deepening the black hole of hatred between the occupiers and the occupied, turning the U.S. presence in Japan into a bloody quagmire with no glorious way out. Looking back at this dark hypothetical timeline, we are forced to confront the most agonizing philosophical question, a moral puzzle that has haunted historians for decades. The trolley of fate rolled to a crossroads in the summer of 1945, and President Truman was the one standing at the lever. On one track, it was the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, people who would vaporize in the blink of an eye under the million-degree light of a bomb unprecedented in history. But on the other track, it was the annihilation of tens of millions of people, including millions of American soldiers bleeding out on beaches, millions of Japanese starving to death in the winter, biological plague spreading across the American continent, and a Japanese nation torn into geopolitical shreds under the boots of the Soviet Red Army. In the cruelest paradox of war, the two atomic bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, the ultimate symbols of destruction, were the most brutal yet the only tool to sever the loop of absolute extermination. It caused a psychological shock so immense that it shattered the blind pride of Japan's militaristic elite, forcing them to accept unconditional surrender before their country was entirely erased from the flow of human civilization. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima didn't just take lives, it saved an entire nation from a mass suicide plan, and saved the world from a prolonged war that would forever alter human order in the darkest possible way. History is always written by the crossroads that humanity inadvertently passes through. When standing at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial today, gazing at the Genbaku Dome scarred by the blast, we shed tears over the ultimate pain of the victims. But in a parallel universe, if that dome had never collapsed due to an atomic bomb, perhaps today there would be no Japanese people left on this archipelago to build a memorial. The story of "What if the atomic bomb was never dropped" is not a justification for war crimes or the brutality of nuclear weapons. It is a mirror reflecting the naked truth about the fragile boundary between evil and a greater evil, between survival and extinction. It reminds us that the peace we breathe today was built upon the ashes of the most agonizing decisions, and that humanity must never allow itself to slide to the brink where mass destruction becomes the only humane choice. Thank you for joining us to the very end of this journey exploring this chilling and haunting alternate timeline. History is not just about what happened, but also the countless paths that, fortunately, we did not take. What do you think about this scenario? Did President Truman truly face a least bad choice, or did the Allies have another path, another miracle to end the war without the shadow of the atomic mushroom cloud? Does the scenario of a divided Japan remind you of any other conflicts in history? Please leave your thoughts, perspectives, and debates right down in the comments section, because every one of your viewpoints is a crucial puzzle piece for us to collectively view history in the most multidimensional way. Don't forget to like, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next top secret files and earth-shattering what-if scenarios. And if you are still curious to dive deeper into the underground world of World War II crimes, click right on the video displaying on the screen to uncover the mystery of Unit 731, the Phantom Army that spread humanity's most terrifying plague. Goodbye and see you again in the next Mysteries of History.